There for Care is brought to you by CareScout with the goal of sharing real-life conversations about aging care. Views expressed on this program are the speaker's own. We do not provide medical, legal, tax, financial, or other professional advice. Always talk to your own professional advisors for advice tailored to your needs. Hi, welcome to the There for Care podcast by CareScout, a podcast about all things aging care, whether you're navigating the journey for yourself or someone you love. I'm Amy Ryan, and today with us, we have Adria Thompson, a seasoned speech pathologist and dementia care educator who is bringing her knowledge and skill sets to the masses over a number of social media platforms under the handle Be Like Care. Thank you for joining us today, Adria.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So just to get into a little bit of your story, your journey to dementia care wasn't exactly linear. So how did you find yourself here?
I was never someone who always knew what we wanted to do. Like, I was not a person who in kindergarten said, I'm going to be a speech language pathologist and specialize in dementia care. I really had no idea. One thing that I did have experience in as a child, though, was actually receiving speech therapy. So when I was in college, I felt very lost. I knew I wanted to go to college, but I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And I took a career counseling class, and every aptitude test, personality test showed that I would be a good match for speech pathology. And I was like, I don't know what that is. I knew of it as speech therapy. Mm-hmm. And so I had to do a paper on speech pathology in general. And it was really eye-opening to me because I was like, I think I have experience with that as a child. And so, yeah, I just started kind of going down the path of being a speech language pathologist or speech therapist, which can be used interchangeably, I learned. And I thought I wanted to work with kids. So certainly not at all imagining that I was going to do what I'm doing today all those years ago.
Yeah. So what is your favorite part about the work that you do?
I think my favorite part of speech pathology is really just being able to work one-on-one with people. And, even though I thought I was going to work with kids, even into the second semester of my second year of grad school, right before graduation, I thought I was going to work with kids with disabilities. And it wasn't until I started applying for jobs that I got an offer from a nursing home and thought, well, I could do that for a little while and get some experience. And I ended up loving it. And really the biggest thing I love is being able to sit one-on-one with other human beings, hearing their stories and being a problem solver, which is what I thought I wanted to do with kids. But certainly I find that my personality and skills fit better with the geriatric population. You just get to hear what people are, experiencing, what challenges they're facing, and be able to be a support person and be creative in figuring out how I can make their lives a little bit easier.
Yeah. And so how does your own personal experience with speech therapy when you were younger, how do you feel like that maybe informs how you approach your work, even though it is with older adults and not with kids?
Yeah. I was a very shy and quiet kid. And I think that was because I had some articulation issues. So I couldn't say my R's and S's as many kids can't. But I was in speech therapy for like 5 years, which is kind of a long time. It took me a while to master those sounds. And so I think that I have the unique experience of knowing that having a communication disorder affects how you show up in the world. And I was so painfully shy. Everyone in my family can tell you that. And so I keep that perspective. I know what it's like to be on the other side. And I know what makes me feel safe as a patient or as a client, which was someone who took interest in the things that I cared about and was able to kind of draw me out a little bit slowly. And I feel like my work with individuals with dementia kind of allows me to do that as well, to know that because they're having communication issues, even though it's not just sounds, it might be actual thoughts that are hard to get out. I have that perspective that if I can make that a little bit easier, then they can be more of themselves and interact with the world a little bit better.
Amazing. So how does social media fit into all of this?
hmm So when I graduated and became a speech language pathologist, social media wasn't that big of a deal. Like we had Facebook, and this was in 2014. And certainly being an influencer was not even a term. So that was not at all what I was setting out to be. But what ended up happening is over the course of 10 years following graduation, I started feeling my heart drawn not only towards geriatrics, but specifically towards my patients who had dementia. And that was, I think, for a few reasons. One was because I saw that people with dementia were the ones that were most misunderstood, and I'm just naturally drawn towards those kinds of people. But then also, my grandmother got a diagnosis of dementia. And so she started showing signs. And so, both professionally and personally, there was this like culmination of like, no one knows what to do with people with dementia. And I'm willing to take on the challenge in my own world and in my own community that I was working in. So I kept my head down and just really, I was working with hundreds over the course of 10 years, hundreds of people with dementia one on one. And I learned a whole lot. And so in 2021, my husband and I moved from Kentucky to Washington State. And so I had to quit my job. And at that point, I had had some experience training other occupational, physical, and speech therapists and nurses and aides about dementia and like how to interact with them better. And so when I went to Washington, I had no reputation. No one knew who I was. Like, no, I didn't have connections there. And so I was finding a lot of resistance when I would go to a nursing home and say, "Can I train your staff about how to work with people with dementia?" They were like, "Oh, we have nurses and social workers for that. Like, that's not, we don't need a speech therapist. They talk just fine." So I was just constantly coming up to this misunderstanding of my field and my role. And I just thought, you know what? If I could just prove to them that I know what I'm talking about, then maybe they'd listen to me and maybe I can make an impact. So I honestly didn't have like a personal social media presence at the time, but I just started making videos like, here's what I would do in this situation with this person with dementia. And I just started sharing my experiences and like just sharing so many things that I learned from people with dementia on social media. And it just completely blew up. I had no expectation of becoming a social media content creator, but I just kind of followed the most obvious need, which was more education about dementia.
Yeah. What is the story behind the name Be Light Care?
Yeah, I chose the name Be Light Care for the three different meanings of the word light. So first, most obviously, is like light as in illuminate. So I wanted to illuminate, shine a light on an often dark and mysterious topic of dementia. There's a big stigma around having dementia or loving someone with dementia. And so I'm willing to kind of step out into the light and talk about it, even in those dark places. Then the second meaning of the word light is to make things not so heavy. So I wanted to like take the weight off of caregivers that they were feeling, and even people with dementia. The weight of the word dementia feels too heavy to carry sometimes. And so I wanted to be light in the aspect of just lightening that burden a little bit. And then light in the aspect of like sparking an interest. I want to light a fire under especially younger people who are choosing to be in healthcare fields, to choose to be in settings caring for people with dementia. So it's very strategic. And I find that the work I do allows me to do all three of those things pretty clearly.
Yeah. I want to dig into a comment that you just made about um, lighting that spark with the younger generation and working with the older generations. And what are some of the challenges or what are some of the, obstacles that you see in that being a more approachable, attractive career path
Mhm.
for more younger professionals?
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest, dementia care is not sexy. It's not a place where you're going to get so much praise and thanks. And I think the biggest reason for that, if we compare dementia care to maybe other, more specialized areas, is that we're not in the business of seeing cures or of like improving someone's condition. And because of that reason, because we don't see people getting better or recovering, especially when you're working in the field of rehabilitation, like physical, occupational, or speech therapy, we want to come in as the superheroes and say, oh, you've just had a stroke. Let me teach you to talk again. Oh, you've just had a traumatic brain injury. Let me teach you to walk again. And getting to see those really cool stories of recovery is really attractive to young people, especially those who are choosing to be in fields like that. And so what we see dementia care as is, certainly not my words, but kind of this idea of like it's a lost cause. Well, I mean, they have dementia, so what's the point? And so I think as young people, especially now in my work as a faculty member at Eastern Kentucky University, I'm very specifically seeing how young clinicians and young students want to get and make people better. And so dementia care just doesn't really fit that world in which they think they're going to live in.
Makes a lot of sense. So what are some of the most important innovations that you see happening in dementia care or education these days?
I think social media has been a huge one. I mean, it not only, and I'm not just talking about me, the videos that I make, but certainly since I started creating content in 2021, I've seen so many more content creators around the topic of dementia. And so these are people who, similar to me, might do this professionally in some capacity, but also people living with dementia telling their own stories on social media. And then also caregivers sharing their stories about the realities of what it's like to not just care for someone with dementia, but what it looks like to live well with dementia. I think that telling stories of personal experience is the most important way that we can decrease stigma around any condition. We've seen in the last, I feel like, decade, kind of a shift in the stigma around mental health, right? Before, that was like such a taboo thing to talk about, as being depressed or like having anxiety. And now it's talked about so openly. And I find that we can kind of point back to social media and people telling their stories to bring it to the light and to kind of decrease that scariness surrounding those words and that condition. I hope that we see the same kind of openness and the decreased stigma around dementia that we've seen in the mental health world. So to be quite honest, there's so many innovations. We can talk about technology, we can talk about companies and new blood tests and things like that. But I think the most important thing when it comes to people with dementia getting a diagnosis and living their lives is the way that society reacts to them. And I think that can be improved by talking about dementia. So let's keep talking about it. That is incredibly important.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about how you think about the guide model in your line of work and what role that plays in helping maybe with those conversations or just that structured care?
Yeah, so the guide model is pretty new still. I mean, a couple years old with the Centers of Medicare and Medicaid Services. That is it's an attempt really to support people who get a dementia diagnosis and allowing them more access, not only for the caregiver to get education, but also to get some respite. And then also being connected with a care coordinator so that the whole process of living with dementia could feel a little bit more supported than the diagnose and adios that I've often heard as described in that way, where it's like, you have dementia, get your affairs in order, and that's it. So the guide model, I think, number one, is a good structure. And it's, we're starting to see how it's playing out in real people's lives, and seeing how organizations and clinical practices and doctors' offices are really stepping up to create space for those services and connecting people. I think that's awesome. But I also think that it's just an indication that we are turning our heads towards people with dementia and the experience. And when it's done so on a government level, on a federal level, that's big time, because it really takes a lot of work before we often get to see policy change like that, which is incredibly important. So it might not always be the perfect solution to everybody's experience, but I certainly think it's an amazing step forward.
So someone that's listening today recently had a family member receive a dementia diagnosis. What would you tell them?
That it's okay. It's okay. It's going to be okay. I think the most important step that we have to take first is to tell people and to talk about it. I mean, how many times? I actually did a TED Talk last year, a TEDx talk,
Yeah.
that was called Talk About Dementia, which is why you hear me say that so much. I think it's incredibly important. But I think it's great to get a diagnosis early in your symptom experience, because the world has changed recently in the aspect of the fact that we have some therapeutic treatments, we have some infusions that can potentially, especially in the world of Alzheimer's, slow the process of decline. So getting a diagnosis early is great. That's a responsible thing to do, and it's going to open up so many doors. But also, I would just say to learn about what's going to come, to be aware. You don't have to necessarily read the entire book if we were to view kind of the journey of dementia as like a novel. Just read pages, 1 through 20, chapters 1 and 2. Let's see what you're experiencing now. Have an understanding of what's going on in your brain and why certain things are becoming hard, and then maybe what to expect next. You don't have to know the whole story, but education, I think, is incredibly important to not only increase compassion of other people around what dementia can do, but also to give someone with dementia a sense of control. So I would say education and just being open, talking about it, being willing to say the D word, in front of your friends and family.
Yeah. How do you think about sort of care options for people experiencing dementia? How have you seen maybe those different, whether you stay at home as long as you can or to live in a community? Do you see differences there with your clients that you work with?
Yeah. So when it comes to having dementia, there's not going to ever be a straight line and a series of events that you can predict, especially at the beginning, as far as what the condition, like what dementia will bring about, the symptoms that will happen, nor how fast will it happen, nor how much support will you need. It's very individualized. So I think when we consider the different avenues of care, we have to see it as just like tools in a toolbox. To be aware that, at a certain point, somebody could come into your home and provide some supervision, perhaps make a few meals, clean up around the house, and provide medication reminders. That's an option for some people. But then also knowing that going to an assisted living, which is kind of an in-between of being at home and potentially being at what we might consider a nursing home, which is where it's very much medical care can be provided 24/7 and all needs can be met kind of no matter what. Assisted living can kind of be in the middle. I think that for families, this consideration can be especially hard because there's an obligation, and depending on different cultures and honestly different like family systems, there can be an expectation that you will care for a person with dementia throughout however long it will last, no matter what. And I just really caution anybody who might be feeling that kind of way or thinking that to really open your minds up a little bit to possible potential other options, because it can be really, really hard to look at, someone, a friend at church or someone you work with, and see that they were able to care for their parents for 20 years until the day they breathed their last breath at home successfully. And then to feel like, well, we're 3 months into this process and I feel like I'm about to pull my hair out and I can't do it anymore. Everybody's journey is different. Everybody's needs are different. The levels of support they need are different. And everybody's, family situations are certainly different. And that's even before we ever consider finances, which is a whole other consideration. But we have to be open-minded about the fact that care might look different than other people and also from what you expect it to be. I've spent my whole career in long-term care communities and assisted living, memory care, nursing homes, and I will never be the person that demonizes them. I think that they are incredibly important tools for so many families, and including my own grandmother is living in a nursing home. She's taken very good care of, and it's actually improved her function and improved her health, our decision to move her from at home to a nursing home. So there's no judgment there. And we have to have a lot of grace with others and ourselves around that topic.
I love that. So I've followed your account for some time. And what I loved about it, what brought me there in the first place, was just these very sort of quick hit, actionable ideas for how to interact with loved ones that are going through the aging journey. So I figured to wrap us up here, we're going to play a little bit of a speed round of what would you do, acknowledging that, just like you said, everybody has their own journey. There's no one right answer to any of these things, but just to give our listeners some quick hit, actionable ideas on a bunch of different situations. We're going to run through, I think we've got about 7 or 8 of them. I'll give you a scenario that a dementia caregiver might face, and you give me your advice. Are you ready? No timers or anything, but yeah, we'll go fast. All right. All right. The first one, you need to get your loved one to take a shower.
Okay. A lot of times people with dementia don't want to shower because of modesty concerns. They don't want to be naked in front of someone else. So I often will cover people in towels and allow them to kind of sit on a shower bench and start a shower even being covered up. It's okay if towels get wet. We can often provide any kind of support we need or assistance in cleaning their body underneath the towel. And it can kind of break up a harsh feeling of a shower head on their skin if they're sensitive to that too.
Awesome. So you're trying to get your loved one to drink water.
Ooh, hydration is super important, but sometimes we're too confrontational, telling them, you got to drink more, you got to drink more. So I like to fill up a glass myself and use the term cheers or salute or whatever it is in your world to clink glasses. And it's always a direct indicator that they need to take a sip. So it's less confrontational.
Love that. You're trying to get your loved one to change their clothes.
Okay. So when we want to ask someone to change their clothes, often we're telling them to take their clothes off. And that's okay. It has to be done. But let's make sure that we're always showing them what they're putting on next. So the experience of saying, take off your shirt when another person is just standing there staring at you versus holding up a shirt and saying, let's put this one on, feels much more, much safer, I would say. So always make sure you're holding up the next item they're going to put on rather than just telling them to take something off.
Love it. Your loved one has accused you of stealing something.
That can happen, especially when someone is experiencing short-term memory loss. They do not remember that they were the last person to have something. And so when they discover that something's missing, it must be someone else. So if they're accusing you of stealing, first of all, we need to make sure that we do not react with anger or defensiveness, but What we need to do is make sure that we identify a spot that the person with dementia feels is safe as kind of like a designated hiding spot. So I will sometimes do this in drawers and make some labels and maybe put a colorful basket somewhere and say, you know what? Whenever you want to hide something, let's put it here. And with repetition and reminders of doing that over and over again for a couple of days, it'll start kind of setting in. So at least if they are accused us of stealing, we know where to look, or perhaps they will end up finding it.
Your loved one is sleeping and waking up at odd hours.
Okay. Oh, there's actually it's pretty cheap on Amazon, but if someone's waking up at odd hours and you don't want to be responsible of waking up yourself and saying, go back to bed, or doing it on a Ring camera or perhaps in person, there are these speakers that are actually intended for like haunted houses that are motion activated, and they will say something when they feel motion. So some caregivers will put these speakers next to a bedside and even set a timer like you would for Christmas lights, that it's only going to work between the nighttime hours. And you can just have it say, it's not time to get up yet, go back to bed. And so sometimes for people who react well to cues like that, they just need that little verbal reminder, even if it's from a speaker, to stay in bed.
All right, you're rocking this. Your loved one asks for someone who has passed away.
Oh, that's so tough. And, we can react differently to this depending on where they are in the stages of dementia. But I would encourage you to stick to the topic. So let's say they talk about their mom. We don't necessarily have to answer the question like where they are or what they're doing. Some caregivers will make things up and say, well, your mom's at the grocery store. And that's totally fine if that works. But I have a tendency to say, oh, you know what? I don't know where she is. I would miss my mom. So we want to validate that feeling. If I didn't know where she was, hey, you know what? Has anyone ever told you that you look like your mom? Was your mom a good cook? So we stick with the topic of that person, but we're then able to kind of shift the conversation to more feel good things, because that's really what their heart is saying, is like, where's my mom? I miss her. I long for her. And if we can talk about her in a positive way, then sometimes it kind of scratches that itch.
All right, last one. Your loved one says that they want to go home.
Oh, you scream, you are home. I'm just kidding. Don't do that. But that's often what we want to do. So I would say in this situation, we would give them a reason why they need to be where they are. Sometimes that can look like saying, oh, Dad, I know you want to go home, but I was so excited about the thought of you staying here with me tonight. I've made a bed up for you, and I have a movie that I want to watch with you later. Could you just stay maybe one more night? So give them a reason, make them feel needed, like you were excited about the idea that they were going to stay here. And then sometimes it just means that you need to get on their level, look them in the eyeballs and tell them, you're right where you need to be. And I'm so glad you're here. Sometimes we underestimate the power of just telling them that we want them in our presence.
Oh, thank you for that, Adria. It was awesome. Thank you for the conversation, for sharing your expertise and tips. I think there's a lot that we can all learn for how we deal with our loved ones that are going through their aging journey. So want to thank everybody for tuning in today for the There for Care podcast. Wherever you're tuning in, be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.